Mientras el mundo luchaba en los campos de batalla, una carrera secreta buscaba crear el arma más poderosa jamás concebida.
Unaware that hundreds of miles away, Japanese aircraft were already approaching. Their mission was carefully planned, to deliver a sudden strike that would weaken American naval power before it could interfere with Japan's rapid expansion across Asia and the Pacific. Without a formal declaration of war, waves of aircraft descended on the harbor. Battleships, airfields, and military facilities became the primary targets. The surprise was nearly complete. In just a short time, much of the Pacific Fleet had suffered severe damage, and thousands of American service members and civilians had lost their lives or been wounded. The attack stunned the nation and transformed public opinion almost overnight. Japan's leadership believed the operation would provide enough time to secure strategic territories rich in natural resources while preventing immediate American intervention. From a military perspective, the attack aimed to create a temporary advantage. Instead, it achieved something entirely different. Rather than discouraging the United States, it united the country with remarkable determination. The following day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress in one of the most memorable speeches in American history. Calm yet resolute, he described December 7 as a date which will live in infamy and asked Congress to recognize that a state of war already existed between the United States and the Empire of Japan. The response was swift. Congress overwhelmingly approved the declaration of war, marking America's official entry into World War II. What had previously been a conflict fought largely overseas now became a national mission that would mobilize millions of Americans. The conflict in the Pacific quickly expanded into a fierce struggle across thousands of miles of ocean. Control of strategically located islands became essential. Each island served as a potential airfield, naval base, or launching point for future operations. Every victory brought the Allies closer to Japan, but each advance came at a significant cost. The Pacific Campaign demanded extraordinary endurance. Harsh climates, difficult terrain, and determined resistance turned many battles into prolonged and exhausting contests. Military planners on both sides understood that every captured island could influence the outcome of the war. Meanwhile, the conflict extended far beyond the Pacific. Germany's declaration of war against the United States transformed what had already been a devastating regional struggle into a truly global conflict. American forces would now fight across Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific simultaneously. As the war intensified, another race quietly unfolded behind closed doors. Scientists who had fled Europe warned Allied leaders that advances in nuclear physics could eventually lead to a weapon unlike any ever created. Although intelligence about Germany's actual progress remained uncertain, the possibility alone was enough to raise urgent concerns. Those warnings led to one of the most ambitious scientific and engineering projects in history. Hidden behind strict secrecy, thousands of researchers, engineers, and military personnel began working together on what would become known as the Manhattan Project. Few Americans knew such a project even existed. Entire communities were built in remote locations, where workers carried out specialized tasks without fully understanding their ultimate purpose. The goal was clear: only to a select group of leaders, develop a new kind of weapon before any enemy could do the same. The attack on Pearl Harbor had done more than bring America into the war. It had accelerated decisions that might otherwise have taken years. Every major choice, from military strategy to scientific research, was now driven by the urgency of a global conflict with unprecedented stakes. As Allied forces gradually pushed across Europe and the Pacific, the balance of the war slowly shifted. Yet by 1945, despite Germany's defeat, Japan continued to resist. Military leaders faced increasingly difficult questions about how the conflict could be brought to an end while limiting further loss of life. Those questions would eventually lead to one of history's most controversial decisions, a decision whose consequences would extend far beyond the battlefield and usher humanity into the nuclear age. The story that began over the quiet waters of Pearl Harbor was no longer simply about one surprise attack. It had become the beginning of a chain of events that would alter international politics, military strategy, scientific discovery, and the course of history for generations to come. As World War II intensified, another battle was unfolding far from the front lines. Hidden behind layers of secrecy, scientists, engineers, and military leaders embarked on a race against time, one that could determine the outcome of the war before a single shot was fired. The fear was simple but profound. If Nazi Germany succeeded in unlocking the power of the atom first, it could possess a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. Although Allied intelligence did not know how far Germany's research had progressed, waiting for certainty was considered too great a risk. In 1942, the United States launched the Manhattan Project, the largest and most secret scientific program in history. Backed by enormous government resources, it united thousands of researchers, technicians, soldiers, and industrial workers under a single objective: develop an atomic bomb before the Axis powers could. General Leslie Groves was chosen to lead the project. Known for his relentless focus and organizational skill, he transformed an ambitious idea into a nationwide operation. Across the United States, secret facilities emerged almost overnight. Massive enrichment plants were built in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Reactors capable of producing plutonium rose in Hanford, Washington. And in the isolated mountains of Los Alamos, New Mexico, the world's leading physicists gathered to design a weapon based on principles that had only recently been understood. At the heart of the scientific effort stood J. Robert Oppenheimer. Brilliant, thoughtful, and deeply respected by his colleagues, he assembled an extraordinary team that included Enrico Fermi, Niels Bohr, Edward Teller, and many other pioneers of modern physics. Their challenge was unprecedented. No one had ever attempted to transform the immense energy locked inside the atom into a practical military weapon. Progress demanded more than scientific breakthroughs. It required an industrial effort on a scale never before attempted. Entire towns were constructed in remote locations. Tens of thousands of workers arrived every day, many unaware of the true purpose of their jobs. Strict security meant that most people knew only a small part of the project, preventing anyone from seeing the full picture. Every stage presented new obstacles. Uranium had to be refined through complex enrichment processes. Plutonium had to be produced in specially designed reactors. Engineers developed entirely new technologies while solving problems that had no existing solutions. Deadlines were relentless, and failure was never considered an option. The project consumed billions of dollars and employed more than 130,000 people, making it one of the largest scientific and industrial collaborations ever undertaken. Yet despite its enormous scale, secrecy remained remarkably effective. Even many senior government officials were unaware of its true scope. By early 1945, years of research were approaching their final test. The scientists had calculated what should happen, but no one could predict with complete confidence whether theory would match reality. The success, or failure, of the entire project rested on a single experiment. Before dawn on July 16, 1945, in the remote desert of New Mexico, scientists, military officers, and observers gathered at a safe distance. The countdown began. Moments later, an intense flash illuminated the horizon, followed by a powerful shockwave that echoed across the desert. The Trinity test had succeeded. For the first time in history, humanity had unleashed the energy contained within the atom. Those who witnessed the explosion immediately understood that science had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. What had begun as a desperate wartime research program had opened the door to the nuclear age. The success of the Trinity test confirmed that the weapon worked. The scientific challenge was over. The political and military decisions were only beginning. With the war against Japan still continuing, American leaders now faced one of the most consequential choices in modern history: whether, when, and how this unprecedented weapon should be used. By the summer of 1945, years of secret research had led to a single, defining moment. Billions of dollars had been invested, thousands of scientists had worked in complete secrecy, and the success of the Manhattan Project now depended on one final experiment. Until that morning, no one could say with certainty whether their calculations would work outside the laboratory. Before it dawned on July 16, 1945, the deserts of New Mexico were silent. At a remote test site known as Trinity, scientists, military leaders, and technicians waited behind protective observation posts. Their device, mounted atop a steel tower, represented years of groundbreaking research and carried the hopes and fears of everyone involved. The atmosphere was tense. Some researchers worried the experiment might fail completely. Others questioned whether they truly understood the forces they were about to unleash. Months of preparation had led to this single countdown, but no rehearsal could answer the question that mattered most: would the world's first atomic device actually work? As the countdown reached its final seconds, the desert fell almost completely still. Then, in an instant, the darkness disappeared. An extraordinary flash lit the landscape, brighter than anything the observers had ever witnessed. For a brief moment, the desert looked as though it had become daylight. Seconds later, a powerful shockwave swept across the observation posts, followed by the deep roar of the explosion echoing across the mountains. The steel tower had vanished. In its place, a massive cloud climbed into the morning sky, revealing that a new chapter in human history had begun. Many of the scientists stood in stunned silence. Years of equations, theories, and engineering had become reality before their eyes. Relief quickly gave way to reflection as they realized the extraordinary consequences of their achievement. This was no ordinary military breakthrough. Humanity had demonstrated the ability to release the immense energy locked inside the atom. Among those present was scientific director J. Robert Oppenheimer. Reflecting on the moment years later, he recalled a line from the ancient Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The quotation came to symbolize the profound moral and scientific weight of what had been accomplished. News of the successful test was immediately sent to senior American leaders using coded messages. President Harry S. Truman, attending the Potsdam Conference in Germany, was informed that the experiment had succeeded. The United States now possessed a weapon unlike any in history. The timing was critical. Germany had already surrendered, bringing the war in Europe to an end. But in the Pacific, Japan continued to resist despite mounting military pressure. As yet planners anticipated that a conventional invasion of the Japanese home islands could result in immense casualties on both sides. The successful Trinity test introduced an entirely new option, one that military and political leaders believed might bring the conflict to a quicker conclusion. Yet the achievement also raised difficult questions that had no easy answers. Scientists, military commanders, and government officials understood that the world had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. The atomic age had begun, and its impact would extend far beyond the battlefield. Only weeks after the Trinity test, preparations accelerated on the island of Tinian. A specially modified B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, was readied for a mission that would become one of the most significant, and most debated, in modern history. The decisions made in the New Mexico desert were about to reshape the course of World War II and influence global history for generations to come. The successful Trinity test marked the end of one extraordinary challenge, but it immediately gave rise to another. For President Harry S. Truman, the question was no longer whether the atomic bomb could be used. It was whether it should be. Military planners warned that an invasion of the Japanese home islands could result in enormous casualties on both sides. Every major battle in the Pacific had demonstrated the determination of Japanese forces to defend strategically important positions. Many American officials feared that a prolonged campaign would extend the suffering of soldiers and civilians alike while delaying the end of the war. At the same time, Truman received confirmation that the Manhattan Project had succeeded. The Trinity test had proven that the United States now possessed a weapon unlike anything ever created. For the first time in history, a single aircraft could carry destructive power previously unimaginable. The decision before the president was both military and political. His advisors presented several options, including continuing conventional bombing, tightening the naval blockade, demonstrating the bomb's power before international observers, or using it directly against a military-industrial target in Japan. Each option carried uncertainty, and none offered a guaranteed path to ending the war quickly. On July 26, 1945, the United States, Britain, and China issued the Potsdam Declaration, calling on Japan to surrender unconditionally. The declaration warned that failure to accept its terms would bring prompt and utter destruction. Japanese leaders did not accept the ultimatum, and preparations for the next phase of the war continued. As reports reached Washington, Truman concluded that the conflict could continue for months if no decisive action was taken. After consulting senior military commanders and civilian advisors, he authorized the use of the atomic bomb against selected military-industrial targets, hoping it would compel Japan to surrender and prevent an even longer and more costly war. The order set one of history's most carefully planned military operations into motion. On the island of Tinian in the Pacific, specialized crews worked around the clock to prepare the weapon and the aircraft that would deliver it. Every detail, from weather conditions to flight routes, was examined repeatedly. For the men assigned to the mission, there could be no uncertainty. They were preparing to carry a weapon unlike any used before, fully aware that its impact would change history forever. In the early hours of August 6, 1945, Colonel Paul Tibbets climbed aboard a specially modified B-29 bomber he had named Enola Gay. As its engines roared to life beneath the darkness, the aircraft began rolling down the runway on Tinian Island. The mission had begun. Within a few hours, the world would enter the nuclear age, and the course of history would be changed forever. Vice President Truman's authorization confirmed, attention shifted from political debate to military precision. On the remote Pacific island of Tinian, every hour was dedicated to preparing one of the most carefully planned missions of the Second World War. Success depended on flawless execution, and there would be no opportunity for a second attempt. The responsibility fell to the 59th Composite Group, a highly specialized unit created specifically for the atomic mission. Commanding the operation was Colonel Paul Tibbets, an experienced B-29 pilot chosen for his leadership and exceptional flying skills. Months of intensive training had prepared his crew for a mission unlike any in aviation history. Their aircraft was a specially modified Boeing B-29 Super Fortress. To improve performance, unnecessary armor and defensive weapons had been removed, reducing weight while increasing range and speed. Before the mission, Tibbets named the aircraft Enola Gay, honoring his mother. Few could have imagined that the name would soon become one of the most recognizable in history. Meanwhile, under the highest level of security, technicians from Project Alberta assembled the weapon known as Little Bo. Measuring nearly 10 feet in length and weighing more than 4 tons, it was unlike any bomb ever carried by an aircraft. Every component was inspected repeatedly, with engineers verifying each connection, safety mechanism, and firing system. Accuracy and reliability were essential. Because of the weapon's unprecedented design, an unusual safety procedure was adopted. Rather than fully arming the bomb before takeoff, Captain William Deac Parsons and Second Lieutenant Morris Jepson would complete the final arming process while the aircraft was already in flight. The decision reduced the risk of an accidental detonation during takeoff and reflected the extraordinary caution surrounding the mission. At North Field, mission planners studied weather forecasts with meticulous attention. Visibility over the target would determine whether the operation could proceed. 3 separate B-29 weather reconnaissance aircraft departed ahead of the main force, each assigned to monitor conditions over Hiroshima, Kokura, and Nagasaki. Their reports would guide the final decision. Inside the briefing room, the 11-member crew received its last instructions. Bombardier Major Thomas Farabee reviewed the flight path and the designated aiming point near the distinctive T-shaped Iowa Bridge in Hiroshima. Navigator Theodore Van Kirk confirmed the route across the Pacific, while every crew member carefully reviewed emergency procedures, communications, and navigation checklists. The atmosphere remained professional but unmistakably serious. The men understood they were about to carry a weapon whose full consequences no one could completely predict. Conversation was limited, and each crew member focused on the responsibilities ahead. In the early hours of August 6, 1945, final inspections began beneath the floodlights of North Field. Ground crews checked engines, fuel systems, control surfaces, and communications equipment one last time. The polished aluminum fuselage reflected the pre-dawn darkness as mechanics completed their work in near silence. Shortly before departure, the crew climbed aboard. One by one, the powerful Ryder 3350 engines came to life, their roar echoing across the airfield. As the heavily loaded bomber taxied toward the runway, months of planning and years of scientific research had converged into a single mission. With the throttles pushed forward, the Enola Gay accelerated down the runway, using nearly its entire length before lifting into the night sky. Below, Tinian Island quickly disappeared into darkness. Ahead lay a flight of more than 6 hours across the Pacific. The aircraft settled into its cruising altitude as Captain Parsons carefully armed Little Boy during the journey. Meanwhile, the weather reconnaissance aircraft transmitted encouraging reports. Hiroshima's skies were clear. The mission would continue exactly as planned. As dawn approached, the Japanese coastline appeared on the horizon. Inside the cockpit, final calculations were made. The bombardier prepared the northern bomb sight, while Colonel Tibbets maintained a steady course. Every checklist had been completed. Every decision had led to this moment. History was now only minutes away. The morning of August 6, 1945, began like countless others in Hiroshima. Streetcars followed their regular routes, factory workers reported for duty, children walked to school, and shopkeepers opened their doors. Although air raid sirens had sounded earlier, they were cancelled after only a small number of aircraft appeared on Japanese radar. To most residents, it seemed the danger had passed. Eager above the city, however, history was quietly approaching. The Enola Gay cruised at approximately 31,000 feet, accompanied by 2 support aircraft assigned to record and measure the effects of the mission. Inside the cockpit, every crew member remained focused on a carefully rehearsed sequence of tasks. There was little conversation. Years of scientific research, months of planning, and hours of preparation had all led to these final moments. Bombardier Major Thomas Farabee peered through the northern bombsight, making small adjustments for altitude, wind, and airspeed. His aiming point was the distinctive Iowa Bridge, an easily recognizable landmark near the center of Hiroshima. Weather reports had been accurate, the sky was remarkably clear. Colonel Paul Tibbets held the aircraft steady as the bomber approached the target. There was no significant anti-aircraft fire and no fighter interception. Conditions were exactly as planners had hoped. At 8:15 de la mañana. The bomb bay doors opened. Moments later, Little Boy was released. As the weapon began its descent, the Enola Gay immediately executed a sharp banking turn, increasing its distance from the target before the detonation. Inside the aircraft, the crew waited in tense silence, knowing only seconds remained. 43 seconds later, the bomb detonated approximately 600 meters above the city. A blinding flash illuminated the morning sky, followed by an immense shockwave that spread rapidly across Hiroshima. Within moments, buildings near the center of the explosion suffered catastrophic damage, and fires began to spread throughout large sections of the city. Communications were disrupted, transportation networks collapsed, and emergency services struggled to understand what had happened. From miles away, the crew of the Enola Gay watched an enormous cloud rise above Hiroshima. Even from their altitude, the scale of the explosion was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Scientific instruments aboard the accompanying aircraft recorded valuable data while cameras documented the historic event. For those on the ground, confusion came first. Survivors searched for loved ones, medical workers attempted to organize emergency care, and local authorities struggled to assess a disaster unlike any previously experienced. Communications with Tokyo were interrupted, leaving Japanese officials uncertain about the scale and nature of the attack. As the hours passed, reports revealed the unprecedented extent of the destruction. Large portions of Hiroshima had been devastated, and tens of thousands of people had lost their lives. By the end of 1945, the total number of deaths, resulting from the explosion and its aftereffects, is estimated to have reached approximately 140,000. Adding to the tragedy, many survivors were exposed to radiation, a phenomenon that was not yet fully understood. In some areas, dark rainfall carrying radioactive particles fell after the explosion, creating additional long-term health challenges for those who had survived the initial blast. Later that day, President Harry S. Truman announced that the United States had used a new type of weapon against Hiroshima. Around the world, governments and military leaders immediately recognized that warfare had entered an entirely new era. Yet even after the unprecedented destruction, Japan's leadership did not immediately surrender. Debate continued within the Japanese government as officials weighed their remaining options. The war, though nearing its conclusion, was not yet over. 3 days later, another mission would be launched, one that would bring the conflict to its final and decisive chapter. The events at Hiroshima had transformed military history forever, introducing the world to the power of nuclear weapons and raising moral, political, and humanitarian questions that continue to shape international relations to this day.